It's time again for the Urban Chicken Podcast. Hey, let's talk chicken. Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Urban Chicken Podcast, where all things chicken are discussed and considered. My name is Jennifer, and I am your host. On this week's episode, we have an interview with Ruby Blume, who is the director of the Institute of Urban Homesteading, located in Oakland, California. The Institute is a non-traditional school teaching the curious how to be more self-reliant and take more control of their lives through the traditional arts, such as chicken keeping. Ruby will be talking about the Institute, as well as her opinions on chicken keeping, sustainability, and learning new skills through self-education. Additionally, in the Sally Side Note segment today, we are going to be talking about bioengineering chickens to poop less. That's right. They're trying to engineer a chicken so it won't go poo quite so much. Stay tuned to the end of today's show to find out more about that story in Sally Side Notes. I have one small correction that I'd like to make to something I said in last week's show. Last week, I talked about something called egg snobbery, and I mentioned an article about being an egg snob written by a Beth Kassab. Here's where I made a mistake. I had attributed Miss Kassab, the author of the article, as being the egg snob and her friend as being the egg doubter. My mistake, I had the roles reversed. The author, Ms. Kassab, was the egg doubter, and it was her friend who was actually the egg snob who had her own backyard chickens and was the one who ultimately converted Ms. Kassab to being an egg snob herself through a taste test. I just wanted to clarify that I am aware of the small mistake I made when I discussed that article, and also to clear that up for you, the listeners. Let's turn now to this week's chicken news. This story is really timely considering today's guest on the show. According to thedailycamera.com, Lafayette, Colorado's City Council has recently changed its ordinance on keeping urban chickens to include a new group of would-be chicken keepers. That is, schools. The city ordinance was amended to allow schools, in addition to private individuals and families, to keep up to 6 hens within the city limits. Schools choosing to opt in to getting urban chickens will have to follow all the same rules as a private chicken owner in the city limits. According to the article, since the city legalized urban chickens, it has issued 45 chicken permits so far. The article does not give any further information about how many schools have gotten chicken permits, nor how such schools are going to keep or use such chickens. It is probably fair to assume, though, that chickens kept at a school will be used as part of that school's curriculum in some capacity. I gotta tell you, I think this is brilliant. Now, don't get me wrong. Schools need to teach the 3 R's, your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, and all the traditional school subjects. But I do think it is refreshing to see a school embrace opportunities, such as raising chickens, to teach students some truly practical skills in regards to keeping livestock and how to care for these animals, or also to teach where food such as eggs actually comes from. I do truly believe that children benefit from education in the practical sciences as well as the traditional school subjects. It would be nice to see kids today learn hands-on skills that my parents and my school, when I went through, certainly failed to teach me. Honestly, I hope that this is a growing trend in all the cities and all the towns across America that have already allowed and legalized the keeping of urban chickens. To read this article yourself, please visit my website for a link in today's show notes. It's now time for the main segment. We are joined today on the Urban Chicken Podcast by Ruby Blume of the Institute of Urban Homesteading. Ruby is a teacher, an artist, an activist, an author, and she has many years of homesteading experience to share with us today. Urban chicken keeping is arguably one piece in a larger picture of urban homesteading and self-reliance. Most urban chicken keepers are also avid gardeners and are interested in having some more control over their lives, food, and the sustainability of their choices. Ruby will share many insights on all of those subjects and more. Let's go to that interview now. I have with me on the Urban Chicken Podcast today, Ruby Blume of the Institute of Urban Homesteading. Welcome to today's show, Ruby.
Thank you.
Ruby is going to join us today to tell us a little bit about the Institute of Urban Homesteading and also talk about the locavore movement, self-determination, and how chickens also fit into all of this. So, Ruby, can you start by telling my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ruby Blume. I'm an urban farmer, gardener, artist, activist, author. I wear many different hats, and my latest project is the Institute of Urban Homesteading, founded in 2008. And basically, my story is, before I started the Institute, I was a working artist, and I ran an arts nonprofit for 15 years. And doing artwork for social change, a lot of work on environmental causes and social causes. And I did that till I was really burnt out, and I quit and decided to spend some time doing what I wanted to do, which turned out to be gardening. And I started beekeeping. I started doing home preservation and sort of do-it-yourself food craft things. And during that time, I was kind of wondering what I should do next as my next big project. And I was also having sort of a deep inquiry into what I thought might actually change the world. So for the better, obviously. And around that time, my friends started asking me, so Ruby, when are you going to start teaching us these wonderful things you've been learning? And so instead of having a few friends over, I made up a name and had a fancy postcard printed and started a school.
I think it's very interesting what you said, that you had been involved in a number of different organizations trying to affect social change. Do you find that, I guess through your Homesteading Institute, do you feel that you're affecting social change in a more direct manner?
I think that all ways of working towards a better planet and a real future for our planet are valid. I mean, I spent a lot of time out in the streets, and that was really good. And I now decided that education is really the way to change people's consciousness. And if people are more aware and more conscious, they're going to take different actions and make different choices. So I don't want to say that it's more effective, but I want to say it's more effective for me at this time of my life.
I completely understand. Are you self-taught in the background of homesteading arts, or did you get any formal training in homesteading arts?
Well, I'm self-taught at just about everything that I do, and I think that's one of my secret superpowers. I'm one of those people who can read a book and translate that into taking action and doing it. And so I feel like that's what I do. I do this, what I call research and ferment, and then I turn that into curriculum and formalize it in a way that I can convey the information to other people who might not be as confident to just pick up a book or try something themselves. So, but yeah, I mean, I mostly have learned by doing. Of course, I have community and I've asked people questions along the way. I especially think when you get into doing stuff like animals, working with urban animals or even suburban or rural animals, that it is vital to have contacts in the community and mentorship. So, with the animals that I'm involved in, I have a mentor who's my friend in the community. And slowly over the years, he's now my peer. But, I think thought is like kind of a funny concept, really. I mean, we're all learning all the time. Mm-hmm. And I didn't learn in a school context, but I did learn, like gardening. I learned the gardening from the plants.
Right.
I was willing to open my senses enough to pay attention to them and learn what they had to teach me. So,
no, I find that very interesting because I read the mission statement for the Institute of Urban Homesteading, and you have 5 different points of what the mission statement is, and I'll talk to you about it all. But point number 5 really struck me, and that was promote self-determination and the ability of each person to educate themselves. And I found that really
resonating with me because I think there's a natural instinct in America now that we abdicate our ability to self-teach ourselves to be experts in things, and that we turn to others naturally to be experts in different fields that we definitely have the ability and power to be experts or to teach ourselves to be very competent in. Can you kind of talk about it? What really?
Well, I just will jump in and say, okay, so the word educate comes from the Latin root educe, which means to bring out or develop something that's latent or potential. So educating doesn't mean something down from the top put on you and filled in. It's about your ability to go out and bring out and develop your latent talent or potential. I think everybody has that potential, and we come into the world learning.
Right.
You know, a baby from 1 year old to 5 years old, you're a sponge. You're just soaking up everything around you. And then around age 6, we starting to be taught that we can get things wrong.
Right.
And our teachers are starting to correct us and tell us we're getting things wrong. And when you're 6 years old, that feels very limiting and very scary. And so we start to shut down that natural ability to just soak up the world around us. And I see so many people who are they're just afraid. They're like, well, what if I try this thing and I fail?
Exactly.
And my attitude is, oh, well, if you never failed, you will never learn.
Right.
Because really you learn from is your failure. And as a teacher, I find, even when I fail my students, and I've made a mess before of different things I've taught, the students come back and they tell me exactly what I did wrong and how I failed them. And that's wonderful. That's an opportunity for me to get better and improve and learn. And so rather than thinking, oh, I got that wrong, I'm a bad person, you think, oh, I got that wrong. Well, maybe there's more to learn. So let's get back up off the ground and try again.
That's really refreshing. I think it was Edison who said about failure that took him something like 95 tries to make the light bulb or to make the filament in the light bulb. And he actually commented on it saying it was all worthwhile because I learned 95 ways to not make a light bulb in the process of learning to make the light bulb. I really was very impressed with that fifth plank of your mission statement. Other than to help people learn to educate themselves and to learn self-determination, what are some of the other mission statements and purposes of the Institute of Urban Homesteading?
Well, of course, I don't have the mission statement in me like you do, but I will say that sort of a bottom line agenda is turning people on to how easy it is to be involved in living a little bit more sustainably, re-imbuing our lives with wonder and beauty. That's one that I really love. I think one of the things that corporate consumerism has done in the last 50 years is take us away from our home and sort of demonize the home as this place of drudgery. The whole association, like women went into the workforce and now the home is this place of drudgery that we don't want to be, that we're beaten, we're down.
Right.
If we want to be a homemaker, right? But the truth is that everybody wants to take part in the life of the home. Like we all want to be in our homes and doing things and making it a wonderful place to be. And a lot of the work we're gotten to do out in the world doesn't have a lot of meaning, whereas the work in the home does. I've just seen so many times, somebody who learns to can for the first time, or vis-a-vis your podcast here, gets their own chickens, are just, they light up. They have this like big upwelling of energy and excitement about it, and they can't wait to tell somebody about, and they grew those raspberries and they canned them, or look at these beautiful eggs that my chicken has. And so that type of excitement and involvement in the life of the home and in the life of where our food comes from specifically, I think is really vital. It's sort of our human birthright.
Oh, absolutely.
And then through that, knowing that if we're doing these things for ourselves, we're also living a little bit more lightly on the planet.
I think you really nailed it on the head right there, is that it seems outside the home, a lot of our work is so esoteric. You do this work, but you don't really see what does it all mean, or you don't really see an end product. And to really be able to do something by hand and see literally the fruits of your labor is a very empowering thing, whether that be gardening or keeping chickens or so forth. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about actually how the Institute works and what you guys teach?
Sure. Our format is to offer short one-off classes, meaning on a weekday evening for 3 hours or on a weekend afternoon. A few classes are a full day on a weekend, but short information-dense classes for the busy urbanite who can come and learn a very concrete skill and get resources to continue learning. Well, first of all, to get started the very next day, doing whatever that thing is that they were interested in, and also resources to further their learning, like what their next step is. Our classes are all sliding scale, meaning that we have a range and people can choose based on their income and their ability to pay the low end or the high end or somewhere in the middle. And then we have about 25 different teachers teaching about double that number of topics, offering about 75 of these short classes every year.
Oh, wow.
And the maybe sort of unusual format that we have is that we don't have a campus. Our classes are held either in public spaces or at the homes of our teachers. And that has a twofold benefit. One is that we don't have the overhead of paying for a campus, which means that we can pass that savings off to our students in this sliding scale model. It also means that the money that does come in for tuitions, we can honor our teachers by actually paying them well.
Oh, that's good.
So we love that. And then on top of that, I think everybody is naturally very curious to see what other people doing this lifestyle, how they're doing it, and what their spaces are like. So I actually consider it a benefit to the students that they get to sort of peek behind the fence and see what an established, let's say, goat raiser is doing, or chicken farmer is doing, or cheese maker is doing, or sausage maker is doing, and how they organize their kitchen and their life.
Absolutely. So how do you find your teachers?
A combination, when I first started, I know other people doing what I'm doing, and I sort of reached out to the people who had skills that I felt like they were more their skills. So like the first year, I knew someone raising chickens, and I knew somebody who was doing herbal medicine, and I just from my greater circles. I don't live in a vacuum. I actually know people, much to other people's surprise. But so that was one way. And then the other way is if there's a topic that I really want to offer, I use my skills as a researcher. I go online to see who might be teaching that in my area through other organizations. I use my mailing list and listserv to ask the students and my greater community, who do you know who's doing this? Sometimes I find people who are doing a skill but aren't really yet evolved as a teacher, and then I try to mentor them and help them along if I can't find someone who has both skills. And that's something that people don't think about that much.
Right.
It's one thing to be good at doing something, but it's another thing to be able to convey that information. And I'm like fourth generation teacher. Even my great grandmother's last name was Malamud, which means teacher. So I feel like I carry the teaching genes in my body, and it's really a very particular skill. You have to really be able to understand how people learn and frame things in several different ways to be able to catch all the different learning styles in the group. And so I'm always looking for not only somebody who's good at a skill, but also skilled at teaching.
Do you find it's pretty easy to train up people who aren't necessarily natural teachers, or is that the hardest part?
It depends. I think that there are some people whose personalities they're never going to be a very good teacher. Mm-hmm. And they probably could learn how to do it, but they would have to be really willing, and they would really have to work at it. I actually like people who are able to sort of do a step-by-step, and I find most people need a pretty linear step-by-step, mm-hmm. and they want some component of hands-on or experiential, and then they want a recap. That's really basic.
No, there is. I think there is a formula that works well in trying to convey and teach people new information. So my understanding is, and I think you mentioned it already, that the Institute of Urban Homesteading does have a class on backyard chickens. Is that a pretty popular class?
It is. It's one of our more popular classes.
And how often is that taught?
Well, it varies from year to year. I think last year we offered it 4 or 5 times. This year, I think it's on the calendar again 4 or 5 times. We sort of go with the flow on that. If the class sells out, we'll offer it again. If there's a huge demand, we'll just keep offering it.
And so when the class on backyard chickens is offered, roughly how many people attend it?
That also varies. We've had as few as 6 people and as many as 20.
Oh, okay. So
Only people who offer backyard chickens classes in our area. I mean, we're really a little bit of a mecca here. So I know at least 3 or 4 other institutions or people who offer such a class.
Is backyard chickens, compared to the other classes, one of your top classes?
Yeah, I would say it's up there.
How many people roughly attend your institute's classes in general in a year?
Oh, geez. I'm not such a good quantifier on that, but we have 75 classes, and the average number of students per class is about 10. Some classes only have 6, and others have 20. So called 10 an average, and so that's 750 people. It's not a huge world, but it's something.
No, I think that's actually pretty impressive. If from the beginning of the start of the Institute, would you say that attendance is rising each year?
It's really hard to say. I feel like we've been able to offer more classes every year, and attendance really is shifts. Like some classes were really popular the first year, and then no one had any interest anymore. And right now in my area, it seems like everybody and their sister and brother is starting an urban sustainability education project. We were sort of early. I think we were our timing was really, really good. And that seems to be another one of my secret superpowers. That sort of sensibility of timing when something is ripe to happen.
Right.
And so now in the meantime, there's lots and lots. I mean, I really literally every week I hear about someone else who's offering classes, and I think it's great. But of course, that's also competition. And of course, in the way our culture works, the next new thing is always the hot. So I would say it's really been even for the past couple years. And I'm just hoping we can keep going. And yet, if it topped out and there was no demand anymore, I would have to say I think that's great too, because it means everybody has the information.
That's, I think, a very refreshing attitude on it. Okay, so kind of shifting gears a little bit, my questions. I'm pretty familiar with Alice Waters, and I know that she and a group of friends started Chez Panisse back in, 1971. And it seems that Alice Waters and her group of friends that started that restaurant were kind of the pioneers in the idea of being a locavore and living sustainably and keeping that in mind with food. Do you think the locavore movement is still gaining traction in San Francisco 3 decades later?
So I'm not sure if I would give all that credit to Alice Waters.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of reasons why localism and locavorism have become more and more popular. I would cite a bunch of different things that are factoring in. But I would say in terms of that, it's out, as a matter of fact, we haven't even really gotten started. I think the idea of localism is still it's not even in the mainstream yet. And it gains some what do I want to call that, exposure, because we have supermarkets here now, some of the better ones that will actually put on their tags where stuff comes from.
Yeah.
Pretty unusual nationwide. I know our Whole Foods here does it, and our local market, which is called the Berkeley Bowl, does it, and probably a few of the locally owned markets do it. And of course, the farmers market scene is really on the rise. But I think most people don't really think about it, and I would extend that to, I think it's great that the people who do think about it are thinking about getting their food locally, but it has to go so much further than that. You can't find a pair of shoes that wasn't made in Asia.
Right.
And if we really want to make a difference, we not only have to get our food locally, we have to start paying the true costs of what it costs to make things, and getting our clothing and our household goods, and a lot of that stuff really needs to start to be made closer to home and consumed closer to home. So really, right at the beginning, barely in the consciousness of our nation's people.
So stepping back for a minute, I am curious, besides Alice Waters and her group of friends, who else would you give a lot of credit to for kind of pushing the locavore movement forward, not only in San Francisco, but maybe even nationally?
Yeah, well, so I think more of not just the locavore, but the whole
Sure.
the bigger movement.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael Pollan,
Right.
Way more famous than Alice Waters. She is famous and well known, but he has had a number of best-selling books. People in the middle of the country who've never thought of organic food thought, oh, maybe I should compost, because they read his books. And so what are the changes that you can make on a small scale level is going to be where your food comes from, because it's so direct. Another instance, of course, is slow food. And I don't remember when they started, but I think they've really made an impact, especially here in the Bay Area. I mean, we have the term foodie. Well, where did foodie come from? Foodie came from the slow food movement.
Right, which came out of Italy, I believe.
Oh, the slow food movement started in Italy, but it's worldwide. So, and I think that's something that the slow food movement really values is local foods. And then, I would say there's some other factors that maybe are not so much directly about the locavorism, but they're part of this homesteading movement, which I sort of relate to more globally than the locavore, just a subset. There's a huge movement of do-it-yourself crafts, and by extension, food crafts. And where that comes from, I don't know, but it's like a huge trend at the moment.
So obviously my podcast is focused on keeping backyard chickens. Could you talk a little bit about how you think keeping backyard chickens fits into all of this movement, whether that be sustainability, locavore, self-determination? Just how do you see keeping backyard chickens fitting into all of this?
One thing we haven't really talked about yet is ethical animal husbandry.
Okay.
So I see that this are trying to change the way they live and where their food comes from. One of the things that people have a really hard time with is seeing how animals are treated industrially, right?
Right.
So if you've ever seen the footage of how egg-laying chickens are treated, it's horrendous. So I think there's that. I think a desire to have an animal product that comes from animals that are treated well. And when you have your own backyard chickens or other animals, you know exactly what kind of life that animal had. And by extension, you know what the quality of the food they're producing is. So, for example, I just personally have the opinion that like a happy hen gives happy eggs,
Right.
There's an energetic quality about the eggs that come from a bird that's got a great life with fun food and good companionship and enough ample space to run around. Energetics of that food is going to be healthier. And bottom line, if they're getting organic feed and fresh air, I also imagine just on a nutritional level, that food is going to be healthier. And then naturally, if you're raising the chickens right in your own backyard, you have two benefits. One is that you're not shipping those eggs from anywhere, so you don't have added costs, that transportation, which of course is the basis for the locavore movement. And then on top of that, you have an extra bonus of the chicken manure, which is not waste, but gold for your garden. So the whole idea that we keep plants and animals separately, the way it's done in industrial agriculture, is really sort of a bankrupt pyramid scheme for the environment. It's very natural and makes a logical science sense to keep animals and plants together. So it all feeds into how to have a healthier world in a lot of different ways.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think that people underestimate the value or the power of individuals keeping their own backyard chickens. I believe that the more of us who turn to keeping our own chickens and producing our own eggs will eventually have a pretty profound effect on the egg industry, the commercial industry, as more of us opt out. It's all about supply and demand. And if we opt out of the way that they are supplying it, I think we can affect change. Do you think that's true or no?
I think it's going to take a long time. I mean, when we're not even in most urban areas, we're not even at 5% of producing our own food. 0.03% or something like that. So I want to be excited and hopeful, but not unrealistic.
Nope, that's fair. That's totally fair. So let's talk about the area where you live, the San Francisco, greater Oakland Bay area. How accessible do you think it would be for the average urbanite living in the greater San Francisco area to actually keep some backyard chickens?
I think it's pretty doable. I mean, you need to have some space and you need to have some infrastructure to give them a healthy habitat. The chickens, the birds themselves are pretty easy to get. Yeah, I think it's pretty doable.
And what do you think would be the biggest barriers or challenges for keeping backyard chickens in your area?
Well, possibly your neighbors. They might not like to hear the happy sound of hens. They really are, even if you don't keep roosters. Roosters are illegal here in Oakland. But even if you don't keep roosters, the hens are pretty chatty. I don't keep chickens myself. I have other animals, but my neighbors have chickens, and they're 3 houses away. I hear them. I think that if you want to feed organic, it may be hard to find a source in a city for organic feed. We are fortunate enough to have an East Bay Urban Agricultural Alliance who does a bulk feed order for us, so we can get organic food for our birds. And, there's a big question in our city government, in Oakland in particular, not in every municipality, about whether it's legal or not. So depending where you live, it may not be legal, or you may have an expensive permit to keep them. And also depending where you live, there may be laws about how far from a farm or human habitation you can have your birds. And I think the other limitation for urban people is healthcare. And, there's not a lot of vets. We don't have a country vet in the city.
Right.
Vets are used to taking care of cats and dogs, and they'll charge you an arm and a leg to save your cat and dog. And it's really a question of your chicken. Are you going to spend $300 to save a chicken? And if not, do you have the resources and the emotional ability to call your bird? Meaning, can you take them out? And do you know how to do that? And do you have the information on how to do? When you keep your own livestock, you have to become a vet tech, basically.
Yeah.
Healthcare for animals. And, that's one of the classes we offer. We offer a home health care for urban livestock. And the reason we offer it, I actually co-developed it with my mentor because there was no way to find out that information. And so we went out and did that. We went out and did a lot of research and put together some basic information on health care for people who want to keep animals.
Oh, I think that's brilliant, because that is the hard part of having any kind of urban livestock is trying to figure out what to do or how to help them when they're ill. And it's expensive and it's hard to find that information. I think people are reluctant to put themselves out there in being considered giving any kind of medical advice, if they're not a vet or a doctor per se.
Whether you like it or not, you're actually 100% allowed legally to do whatever you want with your animals, including kill them. And that's true for dogs and cats too.
Do you think, and I ask this because in some of my reading about other areas, San Francisco is probably one of the most expensive places in America to live, or the San Francisco Bay Area. Do you think there's a certain mindset of, I've spent X amount of God knows how much money on my house, and having chickens next door is sort of déclassé, or it should be out in the farmland?
So it depends which subset of our culture you live in. So I have a girlfriend. She's actually the one who teaches the backyard chickens class, goats, and she lives in a very fancy neighborhood. She got her house on the cheap by accident through a series of flukes, and to just literally call the city on her twice a week and really like her because they feel that she's bringing down their property value. On the other hand, there are people, if you look at a different subsection, they just think that's the cat's pajamas. And they think it raises the value of their neighborhood. I'm fortunate to live in one of those neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think it probably comes down to just some of the education versus prejudices of your neighbors. And you get lucky or you get unlucky depending on where you live and who you live next to.
Yeah.
In this modern world, I know because I taught myself canning a few years ago, and I was learning to beekeep for several years with an old farmer. And I have friends that actually posed the question to me, like, why are you bothering to learn this? We live in a modern world. We don't need to do this. You can just go to the grocery store and buy what you need to buy. Why do you think learning these homesteading traditional art skills is still important or relevant today?
It gives us an involvement with not just the concrete and the businesses of our world, but also the natural aspect of our world. So, for example, I am a beekeeper. I've been a beekeeper for almost 17 years. And what I love about it is that it connects me to the natural cycles. I also have rabbits, and I love being involved in their life cycle. And, I have 2 litters of bunnies right now, and it's so fun and so exciting. And I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think it gives meaning to everybody. But what's the question? You don't have to do this? Well, yeah, I don't have to do it. I get to do it. And if you just want to spend all your time on the weekend playing video games, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. That doesn't add something to my life. The other thing is, we don't know if we're going to have enough oil forever. And, I often joke about this, but, when it all goes to hell in a handbasket, you're going to show up at my yard. You're not going to go to the guy who all he knows how to do is play video games. You're going to come to my yard where I know how to raise food and tend animals, right? So I think there's a value to that information in the same way that you don't want to lose heirloom varieties of vegetables. The genetic information in that is important. You also don't want to lose heirloom skills because you never know when you might need them. And some of those skills might actually give information and vitality to scientific research. But if you don't have the information anymore, it doesn't have that potential.
Do you think that the traditional homesteading arts were or are at risk of being wholly forgotten in today's American society?
Never wholly forgotten. No, I think there's always going to be people who are sort of just geared in that way. But, a lot of my students come through and they're, I'm going to teach them a class and they've never done it and their mother didn't do it and maybe someone 5 generations back did it. And so, if we give in to what I call consumerism and we just pay someone else to do it for us, I just see that as a loss. And I don't think people want that. I don't think there's meaning in that. And I don't think we should have a world where it's all just about paying someone else to do it.
How many generations back do you think it is that the majority of Americans lost these skills?
Actually, not that long ago, really after World War II. So there's been a trajectory of removing us from the home and from our householding skills and landholding skills. So very quick history lesson. The first was the closing of the commons in England. And this was when the rich people took away the right of the poor people to hunt and get their own food and raise their own vegetables on what was public land. That's number one. Number two, industrial revolution. So the men are taken away from the home and the women are now expected to do everything themselves. And that's when women's work becomes drudgery. Again, World War II, all the men are gone. Women enter the workforce. When the men came back, that's the rise of suburbia. Yeah, so we've been losing it. So I really think the biggest turning point was probably World War II. But I also think the Industrial Revolution, taking men home, there were a lot of traditional skills that got lost. We moved from the country to the city and into factories instead of growing our foods on a farm. So, I think it's been going that direction a long time. But the reason I think it will never be lost is because I actually feel like it's in our genetics to want to work the earth and be connected in this way. I don't think that it's actually natural for humans to be completely disconnected from nature. And I think there are urban people who are truly urbanites who don't want to do any of that. But I think even urbanites sort of still, what do they do on the weekends? They go to the country. Mm-hmm. As hard as we try to get away from our genetics of being an animal and connected to nature, we just can't because it's in our blood. We can't really divorce ourselves from that, no matter how many commercials and TV advertisements we watch.
Okay, random question for you that just came to mind when you were giving the history lesson on why you thought a lot of the traditional arts have been lost. You talk about the loss of the commons in England, and I'm wondering if there is kind of a parallel to modern society as we're looking at Monsanto trying to patent seeds, and you have cities that, in my opinion, often just over-regulate what people are able to do on their own land. Do you think that there is kind of a parallel modern expression of this in that people are being hemmed in more and more as to what they can do to provide for themselves on their own piece of property?
So 2 different issues.
Sure.
The whole Monsanto thing. So there's currently going on a closing intellectual commons and of the patenting of life, basically, which is completely insane. So that's absolutely going on. And then the second side is, I think we go more and more towards a bureaucratic state and that people do feel more and more closed in. Yeah, for sure. That's happening.
I know. I follow the chicken national news, and it amazes me when I read about other places where they actually have to go and spend astronomical amounts of money to get a permit to put in a coop that has to have yearly inspections and pay yearly fees to keep 3 hens in a yard. And I sit there and I think, well, how overwhelming and just costly that this would just weed out so many people who would want to do this just through having to jump through so many hoops or making it so costly that they couldn't afford it.
And the truth is there's every model out there. There are cities that have given the blanket okay for anyone to do it. And there's ones where you're not even allowed to grow vegetables in your front yard because it would be an eyesore. So if you're planning on the homesteading lifestyle and you're thinking of making a move, you might want to check that out beforehand.
Absolutely. Well, Ruby, I guess I should probably wind it up. But before we go, could you please give my listeners some advice or some words of wisdom what would you say to them as far as advice or words of wisdom in regards to keeping backyard chickens if they have them or if they're thinking of getting them?
So I think anytime you take on the care of an animal, the more you educate yourself about the animal, the better. So I would encourage them to get some books and read about the chickens, read about their needs, their nutritional needs, their space needs. I would also encourage them to go online and do a lot of research and look at lots of pictures of different coop designs out there and try to figure out what's going to work best for them in terms of cost and space in their yard. I would also encourage them to look on a place like there's a big Backyard Chickens. I think it's called backyardchickens.com. It's a forum. And to read there what other people what kind of troubles they're coming across, what kind of benefits they're having, what they're doing with the compost or the manure. And so just, the more you can be prepared ahead of time with information, the more successful your backyard chicken endeavor is going to be.
Absolutely. Hey, one last question. I see that you have co-authored a book called Urban Homesteading, and I believe you co-authored that with Rachel Kaplan, who you share a website with. Is there a section on chickens in your urban homesteading book?
Oh, absolutely. We have a huge section, and there are the two biggest sections. It's gardening and growing. So there's a huge section on growing your vegetable garden, and then there's another huge section on raising urban livestock. And there's definitely a good chunk on urban chickens and backyard chickens. So yeah, we definitely have information in there on the lovely chickens.
Oh, that's great. Well, Ruby, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for allowing me to interview you. I think it's been very educational and very inspirational, and I really appreciate what you are doing with the Institute of Urban Homesteading. I think it's important, and it has a lot of meaning, and I do think it's the kind of thing that leads to the changing of hearts and minds of people.
Thank you so much.
All right. You have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to Ruby for all of her wonderful insights about chickens, sustainability, self-education, and self-determination. We all have the ability to teach ourselves new skills and make conscientious choices on how we live, such as keeping chickens, among many other things, which do lead to our homes being a little bit more beautiful and our lives being a little more enriched. If you are interested in learning more about Ruby Blume, or learning more about the Institute of Urban Homesteading, or interested in learning about the book Ruby helped co-author called Urban Homesteading, please go to the webpage and find links to all of that information in today's show notes. It's now time for Sally's Side Notes. It's a fact. Chickens poop. And when you cram several thousand chickens into a factory farm warehouse, they poop a lot. Industrial farms have dumped this chicken waste in ways that have led to significant environmental concerns about that poop contaminating local water sources and creating out-of-control algae blooms on rivers and lakes. Truly, that is a problem. How to fix the problem of the environmental damage caused from copious amounts of chicken poo being dumped by these chicken factory farms? Well, French scientists think they have the answer. They are trying to bioengineer chickens to have unusually large gizzards so that these birds will digest more of their food and, ultimately, poop less. Yep. They are trying to bioengineer a Franken-chicken in the hopes of it pooping less. That is their answer to this environmental problem. Now, these scientists assure us that these bioengineered birds will produce eggs and flesh that will taste just the same as a normal bird. Whew! Well, isn't that a big relief? Yeah, I'm sorry, but I can't be the only one who thinks this idea is completely asinine. You do not need to bioengineer a chicken to poop less to deal with the chicken poop problem. There are very low-tech solutions to this problem. How's about these factory farms try composting their waste? Composted chicken manure is actually very valuable. Or wait, here's another idea. If you pastured these chickens using a paddock system, the birds could poop on the ground in place for a few days and then move into the next paddock. Rotating the birds through several fields, the ground would not be overburdened with chicken waste, and this manure would ultimately enrich the soil directly where it fell. There it is, another low-tech solution that doesn't require bioengineering a freaky bird. This is another example of science getting it terribly wrong. The simplest answer is usually the right answer. To read the article about bioengineering hens to have bigger gizzards and poop less, please visit my webpage to find links to those articles in today's show notes. I have one other quick side note for today's show. Michael Pollan has yet again been named by a guest on this show as essentially the godfather of the locavore sustainability movement. It might be worth noting then that Mr. Pollan has just released a new book called Cooked. I haven't read his new book yet, but I am going to do so and report back to you, the listeners. I am including this small side point in today's show because in the show notes on the webpage, I have included links to a written and audio excerpt to this latest book of Mr. Pollan's for my audience's own perusal pleasures. Enjoy. Well, that's all I have for this week's episode of the Urban Chicken Podcast. Be sure and join me again next week when we discuss yet more interesting chicken topics. Also, I want to let you know that I have launched an Urban Chicken Podcast Facebook page and Twitter account. I created those two accounts for a very compelling reason. I am finding that as I follow the national chicken news daily, that I am coming across more chicken news and more chicken stories or photos and things of interest that I want to share with you, but just simply will not have enough time to do so on just this weekly show. So my answer to that is to tweet and also post on Facebook these interesting chicken news stories and articles to share with you as they come up. If you're interested, please join me on the Urban Chicken Podcast Facebook page and or join the Urban Chicken Podcast at Twitter. The Urban Chicken Podcast Twitter account is Urban Chicks Podcast. So it's spelled Urban CHX Podcast. I will be posting new chicken articles and stories regularly on both of these sites. You can find all of the links to all of the books, news stories, and all of the mentioned people and groups in today's show notes at the webpage located at www.urbanchickenpodcast.com. I welcome your emails at the webpage with any chicken questions you might like to pose or any ideas for future show topics or guests that you would like to see on the program. Thank you for joining me this week on the Urban Chicken Podcast. I do appreciate you listening and look forward to spending time together again next week. Until then, me and the chickens here say, have a good week. See ya. Thanks for listening to the Urban Chicken Podcast at www.urbanchickenpodcast.com. The theme music used on the Urban Chicken Podcast is Jenny's Theme, written and performed by Jason Shaw. You can find this at freemusicarchive.org. See you next week.